Okay, good afternoon and welcome back everyone to our Options Growth Lab series. My name is Tony Zhang. I'm the Chief Strategist here at OptionsPlay. And today I want to share with you a really significant shift in the way I am thinking with regards to the investment in the AI narrative. And this is something that really has shifted in just the last couple of weeks. So I want to share with you some changes that we have seen here in the broader markets with some concrete examples and what that really means for investors in the long run. Now, during these Growth Lab series, my goal is to help you learn how to sustainably and confidently grow your account. And part of that is understanding the macroeconomic shifts that are currently happening in the markets and showing you how to think about it from a fundamental perspective. And, AI has dominated the narrative in investing for the past 2.5 going on 3 years. There certainly has been a lot of volatility lately in the tech industry, and questions as to whether or not are we in a bubble with regards to AI. And today I want to help answer that question with some definitive data. Now, before we get started, what we are going to discuss here today is purely for education and demonstration purposes. It is not a solicitation or recommendation to buy or sell any of the specific securities that we might be talking about during today's session. So my goal today is to discuss the rapidly changing narrative around the AI investment. Last week, we saw a significant sell-off here in the broader markets in the software space that ended up actually uh, um, spreading out into other industries, including financial services, anything related to job industries that potentially get disrupted by AI. And this was really driven by two product launches that happened in the last couple of weeks that significantly changes the narrative around AI. And I want to, number one, give you a quick demo of what those product changes are and what that really means for this investment theme in the long run. So I want to discuss this narrative flip that has happened in the last couple of weeks. How have we shifted from concerns of an AI bubble to now all of a sudden asking, do we have enough compute for AI? And I want to share with you 8 sectors that our research have identified to invest in the next 12 to 24 months, which we will dive into further in following weeks. So before we kind of dive into the specific data, I just want to give you a quick demo of what happened in the last couple of weeks that drove this massive sell-off in software stocks just last week. Now, for those of you that have been with OptionsPlay for many years, I have provided quite a few different demos over the years of the power of AI. At first, it started with ChatGPT, showing you how you can utilize the tools to help you do some screening, to help you do some analysis, and our views as far as which one of the frontier models were best has changed a little bit over the years. Initially, it was ChatGPT, and then when the chatbots got better at scanning the internet for information, Grok initially had the lead on real-time information to be able to process what's happening in the markets. And then things got better with Google Gemini, and I would say Google Gemini was the leader for many months, heading into just the last couple of weeks when that narrative really shifted in terms of who is ahead in terms of the frontier models, but more importantly, in my opinion, the real impact for the future of AI and what that really means from an investment perspective. So, what I wanted to share with you here today is the significant change from a product perspective that happened 2 weeks ago. And for those of you that aren't using AI from a day-to-day perspective, you probably have seen, what ChatGPT can do in terms of asking a question. These days, you can ask some pretty complex questions and get some really intelligent, well thought out answers to your questions, whether you're trying to bounce some ideas, whether you're trying to do some research, whether you're just trying to do some simple searches. ChatGPT or the likes of those types of frontier models can do some pretty complicated analysis and research and get back to you with some well thought out responses. However, those are really one-off, I have a question, help me answer that question type request response initiatives. But what has changed, and this is something that we know we've been building towards. There certainly have been a lot of tools for developers along these lines for quite a few months now. But Claude, just a couple of weeks ago, launched what they call Claude Cowork, which is the first, I would say, real retail, non-technical, agentic AI agent that is available for the general public to use. Now, when I say it's available for the general public, it does require a paid plan. It generally requires actually a more expensive paid plan to really utilize this specific tool. But even with the lowest tier paid plan, you can still get some work done with this specific tool. And I want to demo this to you just to give you a sense for what's possible and tell you and show you and give you an understanding as to what has changed in terms of our narrative or our view of the AI investment theme as a result of this single product release. So Claude Code has been around for quite some time. This is for developers, where essentially you can essentially interface with a chatbot and help you write code. And Claude Code has gotten quite sophisticated, where a lot of senior developers are using it as a primary tool to write code. They're simply reviewing it. They no longer have to write code. And the power of this is really particularly interesting because you can give it some context around what you're trying to build, and it can go off for sometimes hours, maybe even days of coding work before it gets back to you in terms of a response, which is very different than the ChatGPT that we're used to, where you ask it a question, spits back an answer to you in a few seconds, which is what I have largely demoed for you over the last few years and shown you how that has evolved. And over the last 2.5 years, that process of asking a question, getting an answer back in a few seconds hasn't changed. The responses have gotten better, but that request response of asking a question and getting an answer back in a few seconds largely hasn't changed until now. So what I want to walk you through is what Claude Cowork, which in my opinion is really the future of AI and where we're headed, because we've all been talking about this concept of AI is coming for your jobs. It's going to automate, all these entry-level jobs or, lower, higher jobs. But reality, if you ever use a chatbot, you would know that that's not doing that anytime soon. However, Claude Cowork starts to actually potentially do that. And I want to walk you through this. So here, I'm going to walk you through a workflow and what Claude Cowork is now capable of doing and what that ultimately means for this investable theme. So here I'm looking to build a multi-step process to automate my equity research workflow. This is just an example. I'm not trying to suggest that this is what you need to do or copy this by any means. This is really just, I wrote this just for an example purpose to show you what's capable. And what I'm doing is I'm outlining a multi-step workflow, right? This is not just, hey, I have some research I want you to do in a really long piece that I want you to research, but this is an actual workflow that requires what normally would require a human being to do. And I'm telling it to first download some fundamental data. I'm giving it some ways to calculate valuation metrics on that data. And then I'm showing it how I want to build an equity research report with a buy sell recommendation from the data that it analyzes. So I break it down into a 3-step process. I tell it exactly where to go to get this particular data. I tell it what website, how to navigate through that website, what to look for, which places to click on in order to download the specific data. Then I tell it from the data that it calculates, that it downloads, this is what I want you to calculate. And I have a really long workflow that I've written on how I wanted to look through this specific data, what I wanted to calculate, how I wanted to calculate it, and then ultimately what specific things that I want to see in this specific report and how I want the report to look. And I have an 8 tab output in an Excel spreadsheet that I wanted to download this data, do all this calculation, and create an 8 tab Excel spreadsheet the way that an equity analyst or that I would expect a sell side bank analyst that gets paid $250,000 a year to be able to do this type of work. It is now able to automate all of that for me. And once it produces the data, I want it to now format it into a polished client facing research report that I can read that I typically would be that I would expect from my institutional sell side bank. So, for example, if you have, if you are if you have an account at Morgan Stanley or Wells Fargo or Merrill Edge. These are the types of equity research reports that sell side analysts would typically put together to give you an understanding of the company, what their views are, and why they have a buy or sell recommendation on the specific stock. Um, so a pretty involved process. And without going into detail, that's at a high level what I'm asking it to do. And I'm giving it very specific steps in terms of what I'm looking for, how I want it to calculate it, and what I want the report to ultimately include. But at the same time, I'm not giving it a ton of detail. I'm giving it some leeway to act as a sell side analyst and come up with a polished report that they think that I would use as a user. So let's go ahead and hit go. And for the most part, you'll see this looks like any other chatbot that you would use in ChatGPT. But and this is going to take a while. We're going to go through a couple of things while this works in the background, but I'll show you kind of how this works, right? Because once it took in that prompt, what you can see here is it starts to build out a process. It starts to say, okay, I need to download this data, I need to process this data, I need to summarize the data, then I need to generate this equity research report before verifying all the outputs. And what's interesting here is that now I can give it access to my Chrome. I'm going to allow it for this particular website. And what you're going to be able to see here now is that this is now going to start operating in my Chrome window. And I'll show that to you here in 1 second. So now it now has control of my Chrome window. And as you can see, it's actually utilizing this specific Chrome window. And it's doing all these different steps inside of this specific Chrome window. So this is very different from normal ChatGPT, where you're interfacing with a specific chatbot, you ask a question and gives you a response. Now it actually has control of your computer. It can access your files, it can access your browser in a controlled environment. So from a security perspective, right, there are actually, for any of you that may have seen OpenClaw or Moltbot or OpenClaw that just recently got acquired by OpenAI, that's true agentic AI where you install it locally on your computer. You basically have root access to your computer, and that is all powerful. But there are lots of security concerns with something like that. This is a sort of a containerized version for your average person to be able to have these types of tools now have access to your computer and do things on your behalf. And as you can see, it's taking all these different steps, it's thinking through what it needs to do, and now it actually has access to your computer and it's able to do all of these things that it couldn't do before. And we'll kind of, as this continues to run in the background, I'll come back and I'll show you the progress as it's going. But in the meantime, while it's working in the background, I do want to ask the audience here a couple of questions. So let's start off with the first one. Oh, actually, I guess it asks everything all at once. But the first question that I want to ask is, do you believe that the AI investment theme is currently in a bubble? There's three answers: yes, no, or I'm not sure. If you don't mind, let's answer these questions, and I want to see what everyone thinks of these specific questions, and we'll share the results with everyone here in just a few seconds. So I see more and more of you are answering these questions. The first question is, do you believe that the AI investment theme is currently in a bubble? Yes or no, or I'm not sure. I'd also like to know how often do you use AI currently for either for work or for personal use? What is your preferred AI model? And how much do you pay for your AI tools? Those are four questions that I would love to understand a little bit about. And as you answer those questions, which about half of you have already answered, I just want to show you how this is kind of quietly working in the background. So as you can see, it finished downloading this data from this specific website. Now it's working on processing the data and calculating the valuation metrics. So this actually downloaded a file onto my computer. It is now able to access that file on my computer. It is now writing the code to process that specific data in a specific way based on the valuation calculations that I gave it. And it's now working through how to do those calculations and then build a summary sheet so that I can actually review the data that it looks at in the next steps. Okay, so about two-thirds of you have already answered. I'll give you a few more seconds for the rest of you to answer this AI poll that's in front of you. But so far, 30% of you say that you believe that the AI investment theme is currently in a bubble. 33% of you say you don't think it's in a bubble. And 37% of you say, I'm not sure. So a pretty close, even split across the view as to whether or not this is currently in a bubble. And I think this is really reflective of the market right now. There's a lot of uncertainty around, should I be investing in AI? Are the valuations too rich? Is this another repeat of what we saw in 1999, where everyone just bought internet stocks regardless of what they did and what the company did, and we saw that crash, right? There's a real concern around that. And the fact that the market is pretty split right now, I think is really telling of what investors think. Now, how often do you use AI for work or personal use? 47% of you say you use it at least once a day. 24% of you say once a week, 9% of you say at least once a month, and 20% of you say I do not use AI at all. So it seems like at least half of you use it almost every single day, and the rest of you are split between the rest, which is interesting. What is your preferred AI model? This also seems pretty, I would say, isn't particularly surprising that 38% of you say you predominantly use ChatGPT, 24% of you say you use Google Gemini, and then 8% say Grok, 6% say Claude, and 15% of you say you don't use AI at all. And lastly, my question was, how much do you pay for your AI tools? 73% of you say you use the free tier, meaning you're currently not paying for your ChatGPT or Google Gemini, which makes a lot of sense. The fact that there's a free tier that's available and it does a really good job at answering basic questions, or even at this point, accessing the frontier models and giving you some of the more complicated models and answering, more complex queries. It's able to do that quite well with a free tier. You just have limited use, but you can access those tiers. 22% of you say you pay up to $20 a month, which is the base paid tier for most of these frontier models. And that is for those of you that are probably using a little bit more heavier for work, or you want access to the more, have access to the frontier models. And then 3% of you say you use 100%, pay up to $100 a month. 3% of you say up to $200 a month. And 1% of you say that you are more than $200 a month. So here, I'll share these results with you. But this is really interesting work, right? And, we've been talking now here for nearly 15 minutes now, and this is still continuing to work in the background. Now, keep in mind, this amount of work that I'm showing you that the agent is working on right now would probably take a senior equity analyst at least a few hours of work to do if they were doing it themselves. So I just want to show you the work that's been done so far, right? So here is the data that it downloaded. This is the data that it downloaded. Well, actually, it hasn't been that long. It's only been about 5, 6 minutes since it started the work. So this is the spreadsheet of the data that it downloaded from this website that I told it to go to. As you can see, it has company name. It's got a bunch of fundamental data about the specific stock, what industry it's in. And so this is just the raw data it downloaded. And then what it did is I asked it to calculate a bunch of stuff on that data. And this is what the output of that looked like, right? So it calculated all of this information. As you can see, there's a lot of fields on this specific thing, but mostly what I was asking it to do is try to calculate whether the stock was undervalued or overvalued, and then categorize it into specific categories. So I have this tab here with all the stocks that it feels is undervalued. Here are all the stocks that it calculates as undervalued. It gives me a buy list. Confirmed undervalued, concern overvalued. It also shows me which stocks have upcoming earnings and what the valuations are, which ones have bearish upcoming earnings, and then it also calculates kind of some of the industry median ratios for things like forward PE ratio, profit margins, those types of things that are really important to help me understand how the company is doing relative to its peers. So it was able to download that data, write code for how I'd like to process that data, process it, and then dump a file onto my computer with all of this information. Now, here's the thing. I used to have to take this information, look at it manually, decide which ones I want to do, and then I would have to write up a report. Now, what I'm asking to do is take that report or take that data and start helping me put together a report based on the buy recommendations that the stocks that it found as significantly undervalued, and produce a report for me so that I can do a deeper dive. I'm also at the same time asking to do further research on that stock for the stocks that I've identified using this valuation metric to then produce this report. As you can see, it's still continuing to work in the background. But the reason I'm showing you this is because this is a significant leap forward from what ChatGPT and all the other frontier models have been doing over the last couple of years, which is improving their models, improving the reasoning of these particular models. So they've been incrementally getting better over the last couple of years, but in the last couple of weeks, we've made a giant leap forward. And that giant leap forward is going to significantly change the narrative around this AI investment theme. And I want to talk to you about that in a second. And this is still continuing to work in the background. But the question is, are we in an AI bubble? And it's a legitimate question because this is the ramp up we're continuing to see the hyperscalers. So if you look at Alphabet, you look at Microsoft, you look at Amazon, you look at Oracle, the amount of money these companies are currently spending to build out AI infrastructure has grown and continue to accelerate. And in the earnings report, just in the last quarter, we saw multiple stocks get hit pretty hard as a result of surprise as a result of those companies reporting that they are going to increase their capital expenditure for AI infrastructure compared to what analysts were expecting. Probably the most notable one of that was Microsoft. Both Microsoft and Amazon committing to a higher spend than what analysts were expecting, and both stocks fell pretty heavily. That was a reflection of the concern investors have. And part of that concern is the acceleration in the spend. And if you look at number 4, the question that I just asked, how many of you pay for your AI tools? Even though half of you, or sorry, 3/4 of you say that you use it at least once a week, those 72% of you say that you don't pay for it, right? So there's a legitimate concern that these companies are spending so much money, meaning not only, and here's the thing is that these companies are highly profitable, so they do have cash to burn, but not only are they burning that cash, they're taking on debt in addition to it to pay for this AI infrastructure. So it's not like they are just investing their profits into this. They're investing their profits and more in taking on debt. And that's really where this starts to be concerning for a lot of investors. And I think that's more than reasonable to ask that question. However, because the vast majority of you either don't pay or only paying $20 a month, there does not seem to be a real reason as to, there does not seem to be a real investment case as to how these companies will recuperate their investment in the short run. And if you just look at how people are using ChatGPT and Grok and Claude, you would be reasonable to think that AI is in a bubble given the pace at which these companies are spending, yet there clearly at the moment does not seem to have the return on investment to pay for this upside. So I genuinely believe that the concerns investors have had over the last couple of quarters with AI are completely legitimate. But that narrative has just shifted in the last couple of weeks based on what I showed you. These are the numbers that these companies are spending. This is the increase in capital expenditure in 2026 versus 2025, which, like I said, Amazon surprised to the upside, Microsoft surprised to the upside, Alphabet surprised to the upside. So not only are we already concerned, these companies are outspending the numbers that investors are already concerned about. And that is the problem that we see with why so many of you believe that AI investment is currently in a bubble. However, what has shifted here is the type of compute that's required for this. Now, let's just go back and see. This is still working in the background, so let's let that work in the background. What has changed is that in the last couple of years, the vast majority of compute in terms of AI infrastructure has gone to training, meaning the building of these models. And the building of these models are incredibly computationally intensive, but they're kind of a one-time thing. Once you build out a model, you don't need that compute anymore. So yes, they are still continuing to build more and more models. So they are still at this moment using a lot of that compute for training. But as those models are getting more sophisticated, as people are using that model, more and more compute needs to be dedicated to serving up those models. Every single time you make a request, there needs to be computing power to power that request and give you that response. And what we're starting to see is the shift between how much compute is required for training, which is going to decrease because the amount of compute that's required to actually serve up the models are growing. So last year we saw that shift from about 50-50 to now about 60-40. And that's just going to continue to accelerate. And I actually believe that this chart is underestimating how much inference is going to be required for the AI infrastructure for the future. And the reason for that is because of what I just showed you. When we talk about your use of ChatGPT, we're talking about you making a request and you getting a single response. The reality is that how many requests could you possibly have as a human being, right? You write a question, you get a response. Maybe if you're a power user, you're maybe using a few dozen requests a day, right? Even as someone who would be a very a power user, and for most, and even for those power users, the vast majority of you are not paying more than $20 a month. There's just not enough revenue to justify what is going, the spend that these companies are using. However, what I just showed you, what's happening in the background right now is orders of magnitude of request, right? So if you actually dive into all the work that this chatbot is doing, it's basically each one of these are a single request that the chatbot has done. So it's taken this entire workflow that I've asked it to do, it's broken it down into process, and it's algorithmically making single requests to Claude and doing all of this work. So now my single prompt, instead of having one prompt and getting one reply, my one prompt is now triggering hundreds of requests to the servers to calculate this data and compute this work. So this has been essentially an exponential growth in the need for inference compute that did not exist even just a few weeks ago. And This is just me on my own doing some of this work, which we're talking about maybe 100x, maybe 500x in terms of the work that I'm doing, right? Because now instead of just having a single request, getting a single response back, I'm making a single request, and now the agent is now making on my behalf hundreds of requests in the background to do this work. And it can do this 24/7 all day long, where it's going to now, from a single request, fire off hundreds, if not thousands, of requests to do compute. And that is the structural shift that has changed in the last couple of weeks because, as I said, we've been all hearing this narrative that AI is potentially coming for our jobs in the future, but the reality is that that didn't exist. That capability did not exist until a few weeks ago, where if you look at kind of some of the entry level jobs, if you're looking at some of the jobs that typically are outsourced to other countries as cheap labor, these are the types of roles that agentic AI are now starting to be able to do. And when they do it, they are now firing off hundreds or thousands of AI requests every single hour to do that work. And the problem is that the the concern around the AI bubble was built off of the fact that humans making one by one request, paying either no money or paying $20 a month, is just not enough revenue for these companies to justify the hundreds of billions of dollars they're spending. But once you get into a single coding agent, which is what I'm showing you here today, to some of the enterprise um, uh, rollouts of these specific tools, right? And these enterprise tools can essentially take the work that I'm just showing you, which typically would cost a senior equity analyst maybe $250,000, maybe a little bit more to do. But an equity analyst can work what, 12, 15 hours a day. These agents can work 24 hours a day without any sleep, without any rest, and do it all day long. So we're talking about an increase in terms of AI compute that's going to grow exponentially very, very quickly. And that is why the narrative that I feel from an AI investment perspective starts to flip from, are we in a bubble, to now starting to flip to, genuinely believe that we are underbuilding, meaning the capital expenditure that these companies are spending. And the reason they're continuing to increase their spending is because we are significantly underestimating the compute required for the future of AI. Because the future of AI is not chatbots. The future of AI is these agentic tools that can really understand the real world and operate in that real world. And they are firing off hundreds and thousands of requests an hour relative to what a human being. And we've been thinking in the level of how much work, how much AI compute will a human being need versus how much compute will an AI agent need. And we're talking about orders of magnitude higher. And that is the part that we have not modeled correctly, or rather, Wall Street has not modeled correctly. And that is the new narrative that I believe is shifted in the AI world. So let's take a look at where we sit. Um, this is still working in the background. Ah, look, it is done. It finished as of 2 minutes ago. So this is the report that it just spat out. So this is the equity research report, right? So I showed you the three steps, right? I showed you the data it downloaded. I showed you the data that it processed and calculated off of that. And now it generated this report for me, this deep dive list. So out of all the stocks, and I'll bring up that list here. So this was the output of that report, right? And I said, take all the stocks in the buy list. So this is all the stocks in the buy list. And I said, take all the stocks that are significantly undervalued in the buy list and put together this equity research report. And this is what this put together for me, right? This really nice looking report, and it has all the stocks, what the stock is currently trading at, what the average analyst price target is, what the forward PE ratio is, what the relative strength is, and what the recommendation is. And it gives me a report on each individual name, right? So this um, pharmaceutical stock, where it's trading at relative to the industry, what its how profitable are they? What is the expected growth? It gives me a company overview. It gives me three bull cases, three bear cases, so I can better understand, what are the investment thesis or potential reasons for investing in this specific stock. And this pharma stock, this Lind, which is actually in our buy list for our equity research, gives me an understanding of what they're currently working on, what fundamentals are important to understand. So this is what you would, now this is obviously a simple report, but this is the type of report that you typically would expect from a senior equity analyst that works at a major bank, probably gets paid somewhere in the vicinity of $250,000, $300,000 a year to sit at his desk running all of these really complicated Excel models and putting together reports like this. And most of them are able to maybe follow somewhere between 10 to 15 to 20 stocks that they cover, and they have to put together these detailed reports for 10, 15 different stocks every single quarter. And they join the analyst calls, they ask the management team what they're working on, and they put together these reports. And now I've essentially automated that in about 20 minutes or so. Now, I'm not trying to say that this is as um, comprehensive as what a senior equity analyst at a bank who gets paid $300,000 a year would produce, but it shows you what is possible. And this is the first version of Claude Cowork that has been released. So, what will these tools be capable of in 3 months and 6 months? I think we're getting very close to being automating a lot of entry level jobs. If I can automate, a job that arguably is one of the more complicated, more highly paid jobs on Wall Street in about 15 minutes with about, this was maybe 1,500 words of a text prompt that I put together over a few days. Um, this structurally changes the narrative around AI and what the future looks like, and more importantly, what the return on investment really is. Now, the reality is that this is going to have some major ramifications for AI as an investable theme, but it also has huge ramifications on sectors that are going to see some extreme disruption. We saw the software sell-off here this year. We saw it last week. I don't think that that is by any means over. Certainly, I do think in the short run, perhaps the sell-off in some of those software stocks could be a little bit overdone. We'll likely see some of those stocks bounce back a little bit. We saw some of those software stocks actually release earnings early to try to offset some of the concerns around those companies. And sure, they might get some short-term benefit from that, but I think long-term, the picture is very clear. This also has major ramifications for younger professionals that are just entering the workforce for entry-level jobs, where the need for those jobs is going to drastically change in just the next 3 to 6 months, as far as whether or not you're going to need a junior equity analyst that typically would be downloading this data, processing that data for the senior analyst to review and put together these reports. Those junior analysts were some of the most sought after jobs on Wall Street as an entry level job. Paying $150,000 a year considered a really great entry level job for someone who has a graduated from an Ivy League with a finance degree, which is how I started my career, with these types of roles as kind of my starting points. These types of roles are going to get disrupted. So that is a major shift that is going to happen in the market, not just as an investable theme, but is going to have huge impacts on the economy. It's going to have huge impacts on different parts of the market. So there are some major ramifications of what this technology is capable of doing. So I do think that for investors, it's important to understand that. It's probably also good to just know what these things are capable of and keep updated on it because of how fast this has changed. Like I said, this narrative has just flipped in the last couple of weeks. This is not something that has slowly shifted over time. This is a seismic shift that essentially happened overnight. Um, and it's important to keep up to date on it. And over the next few weeks, what I will be sharing with you is the research that we've been doing on this particular front and the different industries that this is going to disrupt. We've, at least in the first initial phase of this research, have identified 8 industries that are going to be investable themes, and I'll be sharing some of those companies with you over the next few weeks as we do deeper dive on these specific companies and give you a report on those specific companies. And we'll be diving into each individual sector, and we'll also start identifying specific sectors and industries that are going to be disrupted by this. When we just talk about software is pretty broad. There are going to be a lot of other sectors that are going to likely be disrupted by this specific technology. So we are going to be looking at both the investable opportunities as well as the industries that are likely going to get, in some ways, destroyed as a result of this technology. And we're going to be looking at all of that here over the next few weeks. So today I just wanted to spend some time, walk you through and show you what has changed in the last couple of weeks in terms of the technology. This was just a simple demonstration of what is possible with this new technology and why we have completely shifted our views in terms of whether AI is a bubble or not in just the last couple of weeks. And I've shifted from being concerned to now believing that there is a huge, huge new opportunity in this particular space that has now shifted in just the last couple of weeks. So, like I said, over the next couple of weeks, we will be sharing more of this with you, meaning the specific industries, the specific companies within those industries. We will be covering those in detail. Now, for those of you that are already a member here at OptionsPlay.com, you will get access to that research as we release it over the next few weeks. If you are watching this recording for the first time, you can sign up for a free trial at OptionsPlay.com or subscribe to get access to that research. And before we do that, what I'll do is I will open this up for Q&A so that you can ask any questions that you might have regarding this. And I'm happy to try to answer those questions as they come along. But sign up for a free trial at optionsplay.com if you don't already have it and to have access to this research theme. All right, let's take a look at the questions. So there is a Q&A section in the chat window. Type your questions in the Q&A window, and I'll try to answer your questions here. So, there's a couple of technical questions people asking. Am I using an MPC server here? I am not. I'm just I'm coming from this from a purely non-technical perspective, right? I'm talking about your average person who knows nothing about coding, who has no idea what an MPC server is, to be able to run something like this. And this is just one use case, right? I'm showing you obviously a very specific use case to my role in my industry. There are infinitely more examples of what can be done in almost every single other industry that I have not thought of. And that is what I'm saying is with regards to shifting this narrative, because we are just scratching the surface in terms of what's possible. And I'm showing you a bit of an extreme example, but an example that exists today where someone who has genuinely a $300,000 a year job at a major bank, arguably some of the most sought after roles in my specific industry, where I have essentially automated 90% of his role in 20 minutes with a few hundred lines of text. And the AI models are so powerful that they are able to do that work now in under 20 minutes. What's probably would take someone, a whole day to put together, if not more, with zero technical knowledge, just industry knowledge, basic industry knowledge. You could say that, I've leveraged my 18 years of experience to write those 1,500 lines of text, and that's not something that anyone can do. But we're not too far away from automating the simple, entry level jobs, and we're not too far away from really automating some of the more technical and complex jobs. And that's going to have some huge ramifications for different industries, different professionals. So at the very least, I think it's important that people understand the capabilities of this technology, and hopefully for those of you here at Options Play, also understand the investment opportunities as a result of it. Let's see. People are saying you can now connect the free claw to doing this with other tools. Yeah, you're absolutely right, right? And you don't have to, I'm using the beefiest models here at Claude. I'm using Opus 4.6, which is the most expensive model, right? And that work that I just showed you probably costs, using the most expensive model, probably somewhere around the $2 to $3 range to get all of that work done. Um, in terms of, if you look at the cost of what it took to do that specific work, was probably in the order of magnitude around $2 to $3. Your average chat request response, when you ask ChatGPT a single question and get a response back, if you're using the most frontier, biggest models, you're costing, that's about a cost about a penny is kind of the rule of thumb, right? If you're using some of their lower tier models, you're talking about fractions of a penny, which is why a lot of people thought AI was a bubble, right? Like if it's really generating fractions of a penny of revenue for each chatbot, you would need so much chat to offset the hundreds of billions of dollars these companies are spending. This is a terrible investment, right? So again, from that thesis, it makes sense. But when you start to look at, every single request taking a few dollars in order to do that, and you multiply it by all the jobs that can be automated and all the processes that from an enterprise perspective can be automated and moved into kind of an AI farm, that's really where the a few $100 billion investment starts to look under invested in that. There's the compute requirements are going to be far larger than what these companies are investing in right now. Um, There's a couple of questions asking me to share my entire prompt. Now, I'm not going to share my entire prompt because there are, some of the stuff that is proprietary to me and what we do here at Options Play in that specific prompt. But, what I wanted to show you is just the structure of it, right? Giving the instructions to go to a specific place and download data in a specific way, process the data in a specific way, and then summarize it and present it to me in a way that's readable, right? Not this huge Excel spreadsheet that has, a few thousand cells in it. That's a problem with a lot of financial data analysis, is that you're talking about thousands of cells of data. It's nearly impossible to look through it. And that's what AI is really incredibly good at, is one, it was really good at being able to take data and process the data. You were able to do that, on a separate basis. It's also very good at summarizing data. What it wasn't able to do before was actually go into your computer and access files and download something, access those files and do something with that specific file. And that is what has changed, right? And now, instead of having one step where I would have to manually download it, then give it to one chatbot to process it, and another chatbot to summarize it, you have one single thing that basically automates the entire thing. And that now process is what changes or significantly shifts what AI is capable of doing. And that is why, the compute requirements of AI is going to grow exponentially as a result of that. And that is what we're not modeling properly right now when we say AI is a bubble. So the third of you that believe that AI is currently in a bubble, or the third of you that believe that say you're not sure, I think this hopefully shifts the way that you think about this. And like I said, this just shifted a couple of weeks ago. This is not something that's slowly building out, and this is something that just flipped overnight. And that is why I think it's really important to understand this right now, because over the next 12 to 24 months, that is when the opportunity is going to exist for these specific companies. What sectors or companies are untouched by AI? You can, people always say, like plumbers are not going to be replaced by AI. But the reality is that, plumbing companies are going to be, how they operate are going to be made potentially substantially more efficient by AI. Hopefully, plumbers in the future will no longer have to, you won't have to call a plumber and have them answer the phone. You'll call an AI agent that the plumber relies on to help you field the questions, schedule when the plumber comes out, notifies you when they're on their way, so that you don't have to deal with your plumber directly. So even in the industries that we say are going to be untouched by AI, they are going to be heavily influenced by AI, very, very soon. So you really have to change your thinking as far as how far and wide this is going to disrupt different industries. Um, the question is, what tool am I using here? Yes, I'm using Claude. And the reason I'm showing you Claude is because Claude is the first of the major LLM models that have created a downloadable agent on your desktop that has access to your files. It doesn't have root access to your system the same way that OpenClaw does, right? And that is another AI agent that is kind of like what I'm showing you right now, but on steroids. But it also has some huge security risks with doing that, and so I don't recommend your average user to use that. But Claude Cowork is available for the $20 plan. There's limited work that you can do with that $20 plan, meaning you hit the limits pretty quickly. So for example, I'll be perfectly transparent with you. I'm using the $100 a month plan on Claude. So I'm using the $20 plan for pretty much all other models. I'm for the $20 plan for ChatGPT, for Grok, for Google Gemini, because I'm making a single request response on those platforms, and $20 a month is more than enough. But once you get into this agentic work, $20 a month just doesn't cut it. You've hit those limits very quickly. I'm spending $100 a month on Claude to do this type of work. So, the vast majority of you right now are using the free tier. Um, but to do this work, it costs a lot more money, and that's really where how these companies are going to recuperate their investment on the hundreds of billions of dollars shifts substantially. Because instead of having someone paying $20 a month, or the vast majority of you are free to potentially paying $100 a month, that's really where the narrative shifts, right? So we're talking 100x in terms of revenue compared to before. And that's really why I believe this investment theme is changing. So what did you do? Claude had access to your browser, and in the instructions, access this website. Did it click through the pages on its own? Yeah, it clicked through the pages on its own. I gave it the instructions. It navigated to the website, clicked through the pages just like a human being would. I just gave it a text prompt of what to do. I'll even show you. The text prompt was it was pretty simple. It was 5 lines of code of text, right? Go to this website, navigate to this specific tab, use this filter, and then click on My Views, use the industry averages view, and click on Download in Excel format, right? The 5 lines, that was it. That was all it needed to go into my browser and do all the clicks that I needed to download this data into my downloads folder. So um, the world of AI changes with just that one capability. How can we understand the risk in turning over complete information regarding our trading accounts? Security is a very reasonable concern. I would say that there are some models that are better than others, but ultimately, we don't know the true privacy of these specific models. So I think you have to be very considerate of what you turn over to these models. And I would say at this phase, you're probably better off being more conservative than um, with regards to anything related to personal information. And someone asked, 70% of the economy is driven by consumer spending. If AI displaces workers, won't this impact consumer spending? That's what I mean in terms of the impact of this isn't just going to be in the industries that are benefiting from this or the industries that are going to be disrupted by this. This is going to have major ramifications to the overall macro economy. And yes, consumer spending is going to be a major aspect of it if, let's say, immediately 10, 20, 30% of the workforce potentially gets replaced with one of these AI agents, and you take out that percentage of the workforce, um, the consumer spending is going to take a nosedive as a result of that. So it's not that things are going to be all rosy ahead with the global markets as a result of this. So we really have to think broad with regards to the impact of this in the long run. And the reason I'm giving you this example is because I would say unless you use these agents, these AI agents every single day, you may not even have noticed that Claude Cowork existed and what is capable of what these AI agents are capable of. And like I said, this is just the first one, right? And this is the very early phases of this. This is, you could call this a beta release because to really use this, you got to be paying $100 a month to really use it. The vast majority of you, only 3% of you are doing this. So 97% of you either don't know that this exists or don't have access to the tools I just showed you today. But this is what's happening. This is what's happening on the frontier of AI, and it's really important that you know it from a technology perspective, but also more importantly, as an investor perspective. Can Claude's image analysis help with technical analysis? So that has been proven, probably 12 months ago with all the frontier models. So all the models are pretty good at that these days. That is kind of really not even yesterday's news. We're talking about last year's news. I'm trying to show you kind of the forefront of this, which is just a whole different world. Okay, that covers the questions that I see here for today. Like I said, I have a lot to share with you here over the next couple of weeks. So um, if you already have a membership here at OptionsPlay.com, you will automatically start receiving this research that we're going to start putting out here over the next couple of weeks. If you don't have an account, consider subscribing to your OptionsPlay account to continue accessing this data as we developed. With that, thank you so much. I hope you guys have a great trading day, and I'll see you guys here next time.